Many thanks for making time to be on the show today. And our discussion today basically centers, or rather, works around guys working and, living abroad. And you're one or among the so many Kenyans that work and live abroad. So many thanks for making the time to be on the show today. We'll begin with the introduction. And please let us know what you do and where you're from. And then from there, we can start our discussion. So we're going to start with the first one on our screen. Mr. Sylvester, please pick up the stage.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for inviting me. So happy to be here. My name is Sylvester Makobi, and I'm a doctoral student in classical singing at Indiana University, Bloomington, US. And I'm also the organizing secretary of the Kenya Students in Diaspora Foundation in the US again. And so glad to be here.
The next person, please, Professor Monda. Please take up the stage.
Yeah, sure. Professor Monda here. I'm in New York City, in New York, and I'm glad to share my diaspora experience with you today. I teach at the City University of New York. My specialties are international affairs and foreign policy analysis. And I also host 2 podcasts with Standard Media and KTN. That's the Diaspora This Week, which is a weekly podcast, and also Kulikoni, which is a Swahili podcast. Kwa hivyo ungana nasi tuweze kuhabarishana kwenye lugha mufti. Asanteni.
Asante sana, Professor Monda. And on to the next, who is Gracie Odengo. Please take up the stage, Grace.
Yeah, my name is Grace Odengo. I work in the finance department for a Japanese company based here in New York. I live in the Bronx in New York City. Other than that, my extra activity I'm doing right now is being a mother of a young baby.
Congratulations, Gracie. And it's nice being a mom. I don't know how far the journey is taking you, but I'm sure you're having a really good time with your newborn.
Sure.
On to the next. I hope you enjoy, by the way, mom, eh?
Yeah.
Sawa. On to our next guest, who is Madona. Please, Madona, take up the stage.
Thank you very much, Pastor. My name is Madona Wambua. I am the founder and CTO of Jibu Labs. I am also an Android expert. I'm also an author of an Android book, a technical book. Apart from that, I'm also a Women Tech Makers Ambassador and this year's AnitaB.org co-chair. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much, Pastor, for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Madonna. And on to Idris. Take up the stage.
Thank you so much, Kwasil. Hi, everyone. My name is Idris Ibrahim. I am a journalist. Currently, I work with the African Union as a technical advisor for media for governance with the African Union with ECO.
Thank you so much, guys. We'll be waiting for one of us to be joining us later on, Mr. Kephas Indangasi, who works in the West African region. But until he comes, then we can go on with our conversation. So we are interested to know how everyone and everything is going wherever you are. I understand most of you are in New York, and some of you did not, move from Kenya to get your jobs. You got your jobs because you studied abroad. So perhaps to begin this conversation, I'd like to find out from Grace Odengo. Grace, I understand you were in UK before you went to the US. So tell me, how was it for you when you moved to US in search for a new job?
Yeah, you're right. So I studied in the UK. I had my bachelor's degree and master's degree from London. And then I was looking for work. It wasn't, working out. I searched for, I actually have a catalog. I applied to more than 70 companies in the UK. And being an international student, the dynamics of that was different at that time. So I decided, why don't I just explore New York? America, for that matter, see what happens. And the first job I applied to, I got. So I came here, I worked for a German bank for 1.5 years. And then after that, Sorry, that was my husband just getting something.
That's totally okay. We understand.
Yeah. So after that, I finished the contract, came back to Kenya for a short while, and I got married, got my green card, and now I'm working as in the finance department for this Japanese company.
Was it so much? Of a task for you to get employment over there?
Compared to the UK, it really wasn't. And I want to say that in the UK, there's a bit of, what do you call it, meritocracy. Like, you get a job, first of all, based on are you an international student, are you home student? Then, based on your grades. In America, they don't necessarily look at that. You just come as you are. Well, that's my experience.
Idris, the last time I spoke to you, you had just come off CNN. I don't know how the going is for you. How is the going so far?
Thank you so much. And actually, it's interesting that that's the last conversation we had. So far, so good. Yeah, I've been home, and then I'm back here in the US and working remotely from here. So it's been an incredible journey, I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that you are a journalist, so are you working with a different organization, company, or what is it that you're up to right now?
So right now I'm working still as a journalist, yes, but then I'm not doing like mainstream journalism or the field reporting sort of. I'm more into advisory now with the African Union, and again with an intergovernmental organization which is African Union at the moment.
Great. You did your studies in the US. How was it for you transitioning from a student, to an employee of a particular organization? How was the transition for you?
Thank you. I think for me, and it's something that I started even when I was in Kenya as an undergraduate at USIU, is I tried not to be just a student. I always wanted to not limit myself to class, home. So the same thing when I was at Berkeley in California, while I was still in school, I wanted to do, work on the sites. And so that sort of helped me establish contacts. And so that when I graduate, it's going to be easier for me to, look for work or just activate some of those previous connections that I had. So for me, I mean, honestly, and then because immediately I graduated, I started working with CNN, was also because of my relationship with them in Kenya, because I worked as a freelance producer for CNN in Kenya. So when I graduated from Berkeley, it wasn't that hard because I had already set up that connection before. So my experience wasn't that challenging, basically.
Great. And what about you, Sylvester? To begin with, I understand you're still doing your PhD. However, I know there are things that you're running on the side. Tell me about it and tell me about your employment, experience.
Yeah. First of all, again, thank you for having me. I'm already learning a lot from the people in this chat on about kind of networking and its importance while you're still a student. So that is also something that I've continued doing. And as when we met the last time, I mentioned I came here in the US. I mean, in different parts of the world, traveling with the Kenyan Boys Choir. And then in 2014, I traveled with with the group I co-founded called Taifa Mziki. So when we were in the performance tour, that's when I auditioned for the doctorate programs in various universities. So, and then I was accepted and given a scholarship, and I decided to come to Indiana University. So, as Idris said, some of those networks that I made while we were on tour, those are some of the things that I reached out to when I came to the US, just saying, hello, I'm here. Let's get together for some coffee or hop on Zoom and kind of catch up. So through that, I've been able to connect with different people, and especially in performance, in what I'm doing, classical singing. I needed to connect also with the people in the industry and also kind of see what else I can do on the side. So last year, I was introduced to a lady in Princeton University. So I went there and did a concert with the Mushandi Rapamwe singers. And then after that, somebody connected me to Carnegie Hall, where I'll be performing next year in May. So through all those connections, that's something that I think really is important as a student. Something else I can add is, as an international student, we have to get permission to work. You can only work for 20 hours a week on top of studies. So and you must get permission to work outside school. So it's not like you just get a job, and it must be in your line of study. So I had to find jobs that are about singing. So for example, right now I'm employed as a church singer. So every Sunday I go, I'm paid to sing, I'm paid to go for rehearsal, and so forth. So that's what I can say for now.
That is unbelievably incredible. I mean, listening to you and the fact that, you're paid to sing in church, I don't know. I think some of us just volunteer to do those kind of stuff, Sylvester. So it's really cool that you're paid to do what you really enjoy doing. I'd like to hear from Madona's perspective, her experiences, because I understand you've been working from home, Madona, but I'd like to know your transition, because you also did your studies in the US. So give me an overview of how it was for you.
I really love the fact that most of the speakers today have mentioned networking, because to me, I feel like my entire career has been built around networking. Now, I've been working in tech now for almost 11 years, which is a lot to be specific, but I've learned a lot. I've learned that just through networking with other people in the community and also just reaching out to people in the community really is helpful. Now, how I even ended up writing my first book in Android, which actually ended up being the first Black woman to write an Android book, was just a couple of people reaching out to me and telling me, Madona, you're doing a pretty good job in the community, just encouraging other women in tech, other women just to join tech. How about you write a book and just showcase how actually people can build these apps or just get started in Android? And I said, wow, I'm going to take this to challenge. And I took that challenge, and 1 year down the line now, I have my book out. Apart from that, I've been able to keynote at a couple of major events around the world. That is like just recently, just the other day, I would say 2 weeks ago, I was in Berlin giving a talk in Android with so many people from Berlin, like they know me. So now I feel like I've formed this community around the world that knows me. Every time I travel, I'm like, oh, I know people in this country that I can talk to. So I think leveraging that power of community and networking is very important for students and even for professionals, because it takes you very far. It's similar to what I'm doing with my setup too. I'm just networking with new founders, and I ended up founding somebody that's doing pretty well in the venture capital, and I spoke to them, and then they referred me to somebody, and then I got a consultation job through that, and I was like, wow, it's amazing. So I would definitely say leverage networking and keep your contacts close. And also one thing I like to mention about networking is that don't just do the speed networking.
Before you mention networking, I'd like to also hear from Professor Monda's perspective, because I wanted him to literally be the last person to talk for obvious reasons. So Professor Monda, back to you. The stage is yours. Tell me about your experience, for finding a job and starting over in the US.
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't come from a rich family. I didn't come from a poor family either, right? I was from a middle-class family in Kenya, from Buruburu, phase 4. So I came to the US with $10 in my pocket. I didn't have any fundraisers to go abroad. So it was a roll of the dice, and 25 years later, hey, I've had my ups and downs and my different experiences, right? To achieve a lot of what I've achieved, and also to aspire to a lot of what I want to aspire to, but also to fail and to learn from a lot of my failures and the challenges that I've had. So I think one of the broad themes I've heard, as Madona was mentioning, was this question about networking, which is really important, but more broadly, the idea of developing social capital. So for our listeners in Africa who are following, this chat, it's really important for us to think about tying that theoretical dynamic of what you learn at the university or in school to developing social capital. So how will you network that, as Sylvester was mentioning, so that what you learn in the classroom as a classical musician, you're able then to articulate and to open up those networks that you can leverage. So for example, when he comes to Carnegie Hall, if he's open to speaking with me, I could, link him up to other networks within my space here. We have Grace Grace in the Bronx, right? So, Grace is a new mom, right? As I believe she'd mentioned. But I think coming to the States, apart from tying your academic skills, which you learn in the classroom, you also really have to have a very fundamental good balance of work-life balance. So for Grace, for example, I think she'll really have to navigate this difficult challenge of raising a child with the pressures of paying bills in an expensive city. New York's one of the most expensive cities in the world, but also balancing a relationship between having a newborn, maintaining a relationship with a husband, which is very different when you're single and you're a couple. When you have a newborn, that's a very different dynamic. So my experience also in the States, apart from the academics and tying it to that social networking, is this challenge about, human life experiences. How many Kenyans come abroad from Kenya married? They end up divorced within 6 months of coming here. People are committing suicide. People get deported, which is a lot of the challenging stories we never get to hear. We hear a lot about the successes. So I think I'm really excited to hear from the group, not only about the aspirational stories of how we've succeeded, but also some of the challenges that we've been through and that we've experienced with Kenyans. Lastly, I'd just like to mention, for example, in my context, I'm currently doing some work with, Africans getting deported from the US going abroad. I've written in a lot of Kenyan local media about that experience. One of my colleagues, when I first came to San Diego, was our roommate, and he actually ended up getting deported from the US last year. And he'd been in detention for over 15 years, meaning moving from one jail to another on detention charges. We don't get to hear those stories, right? So, it's really important when people come from Kenya, America's not the land of milk and honey. It is in some ways, but you don't pick dollars from the trees. You have to balance your academics. You have to leverage your social capital. But most importantly, you really have to balance those dynamics and transitions you have, whether it's from school to the workplace, or from single womanhood into being a mother, or from being an entrepreneur to being a writer. I think those are some very interesting dynamics, and I have really struggled with that. And I always learn to be a better diasporan because things are constantly changing.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Monda. And as you said, it requires a lot of discipline for you to be able to successfully, navigate that. I'd like to hear from Idris. Idris, how was your experience settling in this new country?
I think much to what Professor Monda said, it's really true. I remember the first time when I moved to California, the first week, first before leaving Kenya, you're so excited that, you're going to the States, and like everyone says, America, this, America, that. So I was really excited. Although that was my second time, I first came on an exchange program in 2017 to Harvard, but that was, it's a short, and, you're not going to like stay in the US for that long. So it's just like a few weeks, and then you're back home. But then now it's coming to live here, and this would be the longest time that I'm ever gonna be, I was to be away from home. So I was really excited. And then the first week, you're still in the, that excitement of a new country, you try to discover everything. And I think by the second or third week, I started missing home, and a lot of, the food is different, the people, the culture, all these different things. And in a place like California, which is very liberal, there's a lot of like culture shock in terms of, uh, I mean, socially, like social culture shock as well. So I started, I was thinking like, is this even worth it? Like, I think I already had sort of like established my life back home. I wanted to go back home, but then, also at the same time, I have to get my master's, I have to get my papers right. So I think it takes a strong will, and eventually finding a community. I found a Kenyan community in Berkeley and in California in general. People who, over the weekends formed, cushioned me from a lot of things. So that really helped me a lot. And I think, once you figure out like who are your support system, then it becomes easier for you to navigate people who will show you, how to go about the day-to-days. And having friends at the end of the day. And also now work becomes the other thing that, because in the US it's more of like it's work a lot of it, but then definitely you need also a social side or something that you can do, to take off all, the business and what's happening. So for me, that was it, having a support system and also having something else to rely on to get my, mind off.
Gracie, I'd like to also hear from you your transition, because you are used to the UK, before, of course, after, of course, coming from Kenya, and you understand how the UK's weather is like. Was the Bronx a little better, and how did you adapt into the system?
Right. So I'm going to start with the UK. For me, the UK was a bit difficult because I was young, you know, and I was specifically there as a student. So I found it difficult trying to navigate doing my academic, living my academic work, and also, trying to get a job. At one point, I had 4 jobs, and this was during my final year at the universities for my bachelor's degree. So trying to navigate that, I would go into one of my classes like 7 in the morning, and then by 6 p.m. I'm doing a night shift. That's how crazy it was. So trying to navigate that, and then the following day you're doing another job, and then the following day a different job. So it was crazy. I actually get trauma from that when I think about it these days. And then transitioning into America, I knew I was coming here with a full-time job. So that was easy. I wasn't going around doing all this crazy, weird hours, different jobs. So it's been a smooth transition from the UK to America. I've never been employed in Kenya, so I'm not gonna discuss that. But to my understanding, it can be a bit challenging as well. Like now with the current situation, you find one person trying to get, they call them side hustles, So, yeah, but in general, it's been a smooth transition.
Madona, you've been in the US for 10 years now, and you are a mother of 2 and married. How are you managing with all of that? Because I understand you are a consultant, doing your own, business, taking care of the kids, at some point taking care of, the entire family, which is literally what women do. How is it for you?
So I would say, just like everybody has echoed, it's pretty tough. It's not easy, especially when you don't have your family here. However, I found that peace in knowing that my husband was there to help and support me in so many ways. For instance, I did mention to you earlier when we met today that I did take a sabbatical to just raise my kids, because raising 2 kids in America, it's not easy. And this is because you get to work on everything that is by yourself, and then also go to work. It is exhausting. So, and also something that the professor mentioned, which is we have to ensure that we have the work-life balance. To me, I take that to heart a lot. So that's why I took this sabbatical. So I would say definitely it's not easy, but with a strong family and system in there. And then also one thing that I want to mention that I really came to appreciate for moms in the United States is that there is programs like, for instance, the YMCA, which I didn't know existed, that really help with childcare. I know after the pandemic, things changed, but before then, they were very nice, where you would take your kids, they would watch your kids, and then as a mom, you can get that mom time because we don't have family here. So definitely, I would say it's not easy, but find a community. I like to insist on this because it's really helped me a lot. Find a community, and also it can be a Kenyan community. Make sure you interact with them and ask them from time to time if they can also help watch for your kids, and also rely on your partner. It really helps a lot.
Thank you so much for your remarks. There is something about people going abroad and they'll have problem with their documentation and paperwork. And when I say that, you guys as residents, you understand what I mean. What is it that really caught you off guard? And what advice would you give to somebody who is getting to start over once they land? What is the first documentation they need to put in place? I think I'll go with the professor. Monda, please.
I think that's a very important question. If someone was listening to this from Kenya, I think the most important, at least in my experience, the easiest way to come here is as a student. Because, so for example, in my case, like Idris, I was at USIU, US International University. Back then they had a campus in San Diego. So I got a scholarship to come and do my master's here. So it was very easy because I was able to transfer the credits from my undergraduate into my master's. So I finished my master's a lot faster because I didn't have to do all the classes for my master's that I would have done if I came from a Kenyan university, because of the convertibility of the classes. So that's something, you really need to think about. When you come, I think coming as a student is one of the easiest ways, because if you come as an undergraduate, you have a window of about 4, probably 5 years, if you add the optical practical training in there, to be in the US. So you have time to figure out what you want to do. You can go to graduate school. So that would be another 7 years if you added 5 plus the 7 years, 4 for undergraduate, 1 for practical training, 2 for your master. So you can really extend it. The challenge with a lot of Kenyans are found when they come, and most immigrants, if you look at the statistics, most of our undocumented people in the US are people who actually came here with visas. It's just they overstayed their visa, and that's the biggest problem, right? So out of the millions, about 12 million people we have here undocumented, most of them come on visitors visa. So they come on 6 months and then they overstay their visa. And there have been people who've been here 20, 25, sometimes. There was a Kenyan who was here over 30 years and he died here in San Francisco in the Bay Area because he just never gone back home, because he came as a visitor. He stayed on and he couldn't leave the country because he didn't have the papers to come back. So there's that other dynamic of what do you really need to think about? When you come to the US, you really need to know what you want to do. If you're going to come as a visitor, you need to make sure you manage your visa so that you leave on time. That way, if you go back to the embassy to ask for another visa to come, it's a much easier process. Because if you overstay your visa here, you have 2 options. One, you either get stuck in the US and you can't go back to Kenya, or if you go back to Kenya and you overstayed your visa, there's a high likelihood you'll be denied a visa if you try to reapply to come again. I think lastly, the other challenge I've experienced personally is the horrible conditions that people end up in when they don't have papers in the US. A lot of people end up trying to marry to get papers to stay. They get abusive sponsors or, come we stay people. We've had cases of Kenyans dying, women being abused by very abusive spouses because they got into this transactional game of trying to get papers. You have limited opportunities because you don't have papers. You can't apply for a lot of jobs. And I think the other challenge is, a lot of our people end up here stuck without papers, but they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter showing the good life. But if you really, they can't go back home because they're stuck. So it's a very difficult challenge there because they're embarrassed. How do you go back home? You came here as a student to get a master's or bachelor's or PhD. You're going back home, everyone's asking you, where's your master's, where's your undergraduate? And then in Kenya, people are really also moving fast. People are also getting educated. 2, 3 masters. People are really striving. So it's very competitive. So I guess to answer your question in conclusion would be, what is it you want to do in the US? If you come on a visitor's visa, be very clear about what you want to do when you want to come to the US. When you come as a student, make sure you go to school. If you get caught in the work cycle, you'll end up trying to work 5, 6 jobs. You may never end up going to school. So that's another very important thing. And then how do you leverage your social relationships so you know where these opportunities are? The worst thing in America, I think, is to be stuck without papers and to be in a very difficult position because you're in a prison. You can't leave the country because you don't have the papers to come back. You may end up having children here. And I've had cases where people end up having to wait for 18 years for their children to get maturity to sponsor them to stay in the country because the parents didn't have papers. Or some children who were brought here as Kenyans when they were 3, 4, 5 years old, and they don't realize they don't have papers until they're adults. And their parents tell them, I'm sorry, you're not an American. You don't have papers to work. So there's just a whole different range of dynamics. And I think when you come to the US, you really need to be clear about what you want to do. If you come as a visitor, know what you're going to visit, go back to Kenya if you have to. And then if you're going to study, go and study.
Great. Gracie, do I have you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
Give me your opinion about the rightful documentation and what it is that is important to you. You know, that's one advice you'd give to somebody looking to moving abroad.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to a country that's not your own, you need to follow the rules. It would be also unfair if a foreigner is coming. I'm so sorry for the noise. It would be unfair for a foreigner coming to Kenya and them not following the rules and regulations you have in place, you know. And so just in line with what my counterpart was saying, you need to follow the rules when you're coming here. Just make sure you're not breaking any laws. And in the good thing, I'm going to talk about the UK. The good thing with the UK compared to America is that when your visa is about to run out, they actually send you emails. Hey, you need to leave the country. You need to leave the country. So that's helpful. I never saw that in America. And so that keeps you in line. Yeah, and advice on, just follow the rules to wherever you're going. Know why you're going there.
Follow the rules.
Yes.
Imani Manyara has just joined us. Imani, please introduce yourself and then we can pick up with the conversation. Thank you for making the time, Imani.
Thank you, Pastor. My name is Imani Manyara. I'm a software engineer.
Can we see you, please?
Yeah, can you see me?
Just enable your camera, please.
It's enabled. It's enabled, I'm not sure. One moment.
Okay. Okay, as Imani keeps on fixing his camera, I'm hoping we can see him so that we can, place, a face on all these voices that are speaking tonight. So I'll go straight to Madona. Madona, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, Madona, how has it been for you, making up time for work and study? Because I understand you cannot just, immerse yourself in studying alone. You still need to run around and do stuff to earn a coin because you're in this foreign country, and at the same time, you need to fend for yourself. So how was it for you?
Wow, that's a pretty good question. And I feel like everybody has a different experience for sure, even when studying. And for me, it was definitely different. When I was actively studying, I was not working. So I was a full-time student. I did not seek other jobs. I did hear Professor Monda mention about how people go find other jobs. And definitely it's a thing that other students do. So definitely I did not take that route. I myself just decided to just go to school, finish school. And then after that, I was able to now apply for a job. And then I had definitely done a couple of internships. And before that, I definitely also had a couple of experiences that I had individually. So I would say my experience was definitely different. So I don't know if that's something I can recommend for others, but it worked out for me.
That is actually quite helpful. I can see Manyara is back online. Please introduce yourself. The stage is yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Imani Manyara, and I'm a software engineer based in Raleigh. I've been here for quite a couple of years now, and previously, before this, I was in the UK, I was in Germany, I was in
Great. How are you finding the US compared to the two countries? I mean, compared to the four countries, because UK literally, caters for the three countries. So how has it been for you?
I think what I can say, I want to agree with what my previous speakers have said. There is one unique thing about America is that it creates opportunities for everyone. And it's all about how persistent you are and how focused you are. So when I compare the the four different countries, I can say in America, you have to be a little bit aggressive as opposed to, countries in the European area where you have to be a little bit reserved. In the US, is you really must push. You have to, I remember growing up, you got to nasema usijipige kifua. In the US, it's different. If you don't beat your drum, you will continue being at the backstage. Nobody really pays attention. So it's sort of how hard you beat your drum and how well you know your trade. I want to agree with what Professor Monda had said, and Grace, Idris, and Madona, and Sylvester is you really have to go an extra mile.
So there's a question from Juma who is asking on how do we manage to get a visiting visa? And I know you guys do not work with the immigration. So this is solely, comments or opinions coming from your own personal experiences. And I'd like for the first person to answer this to be Idris. How do you manage to get a visiting visa?
So the first time I came to the US, actually, I came on a visiting visa B1, B2, which is business and tourism. And for that, actually, for me, it was easy because, like Professor Monda said, USIU, just by virtue of being a student there, it was, sorry about that. I think USIU had a good relationship, of course, with the embassy, and also had start with the we had an affiliate university, I think, in the US, in San Diego, actually. So it was easier for most of USIU students to, whenever we wanted to come here on official visits or in the school program, it was easy. So that's how I came. And I mean, later on when I was applying for like my student visa, it was easy, and other visas it was easy because I already had that. The first time it was easy, and I went back immediately after my time in the US. I did not overstay the visa, so when I was applying for the other visas, so it was easy. Yeah.
I'd like also to hear from your experience, Gracie, because I understand you may have gone through a visiting visa at some point. So give me your perspective.
So in, I think, 2017, I was doing my master's in the UK, and my sister, whom you met earlier, had just, she got her green card, and she invited me to come over and visit. So I applied for the B1, B2 from London, and it was the easiest thing, the easiest interview I've ever done. I don't know if the experience is the same in Kenya. So basically, what you needed to show was proof that you're going to go back to where you are. So basically, for me, it was the UK. And the reason I used was that I'm a student here. I'm coming back, of course, to finish my my studies. So that was an easy ticket for me. So yeah,
that was an easy ticket.
Yeah, just have proof to show you're gonna go back to where you are. That's it.
Do we still have Professor Monda on the line?
Yeah.
The fact that you went after your undergrad and even got to transfer your credits and credentials, whatever it is, to San Diego. How was it for you?
Yeah, personally, I must say, this is my own personal experience. I think the visa process at the embassy is very mystical. And I'll say this because you can get two candidates with the same exact qualifications. One is turned away, and another one gets the visa, and they have the same they have the same paperwork, they have the same amount in their bank statement. So it's really, I've really found it's very subjective. So I'm not an immigration expert, but I think a lot of it has to do with to what extent do you convince the U.S. immigration official that if you go as a visitor to the questioner's question, that you will come back to Kenya. And I say that in this context. If you think about U.S. immigration, it's not like Europe. So when you come to the U.S., when you actually get into the country, the civil liberty protections here are extremely broad. So the law really protects citizens. It's different than European countries where the immigration will come in. In some countries, you think like Italy, where they just really vandalize foreigners' rights and turn you away. We've seen the crisis on the Mediterranean with the EU, the hate against xenophobia against immigrants. I'm not saying that's not the same in the US, but I think when you actually come to the US, I mean, unless you're committing felonies, you're killing someone, you're committing crimes or selling drugs, if you just work in the US, even there's many immigrants here, they just work under the table, they just get paid cash. As long as you're not bothering anybody, the police or immigration, you get just lost in the system. So I say that with the context of your question or your questioner's question to, how do I get the F2 visa? How will you convince the official at the embassy that when you come to the States, you will voluntarily come back? Because when you get into the country, it's very difficult for the US government to go after you unless you're a felon or unless you're involved in terrorism, because of the freedoms and protection. So I guess to that question, it's really to what extent can you show that you're going to go back to Kenya? And I think that's also very subjective. I think to Idris's point, part of the advantage of having come to the US and going back, I think that's a big asset. That's one of a big green light for you to get a visa to come back a second, third, or fourth time. But usually the first time you're coming to the US, the challenge with the US government and embassy officials is how do they slash down on the number of immigrants? Remember I said 40% of the people here without documents are visa overstayers. So how do they stop that at the point of entry? And the first point of entry or attempts to get into the US will be to get that visa, right? That formal documentation to get into the country, which is why getting a visa is so difficult. Because once you actually get into the United States, it's very difficult, as I've said, unless you're really committing crimes, for the system to root you out. And I think that's different from, that's one difference with the US than say Europe, where I believe Grace was saying, the immigration will send you emails and tell you it's your time to leave. Here, there's just too many people and the system is just different. So I think that would be my 2 cents on that. The visa process is very subjective. If you come to the US and go back, I think that's one very good asset. But then secondly, if you're going to come as a tourist, as a visitor, they want to know whether you can come back home. So, for example, do you have a job? Do you work for KTN, for example, like Person? That a job you can go back to? What's your age? Younger people, 17, 18, they may feel you're less likely to go back than someone in their 40s and 50s who maybe already has family. And then the third thing is, are you married? I think that's another huge question. And that sometimes really ties people down, because if someone's saying they have a fiance in Kenya and then they're going abroad, I've had cases where that really creates its own challenges. But as I've said, it's very subjective, and a lot of times there's a lot of mystery with the US immigration process, particularly at the embassies. And I think that's something that continues to go on.
I think you're muted, Pascal, if you're talking. Or am I the only one who cannot hear her?
Press up.
Yeah, it says muted.
Is she frozen? Maybe she's frozen up.
Yeah. I can see. We still cannot hear you, Pascal.
Hey, Persil, we can't hear you.
Professor Monda, I just wanted to mention, I liked what you said about the immigration, because I feel like that's a very good point, that most of the time we don't even know the situation. I think I've looked into people that apply, let's say, for visas from the United States to, let's say, to Europe. It's much easier when you're even an African as compared to like from Kenya. So you're right that there's some factors that plays around that we don't even know what are the factors. Sometimes others call it luck, but it needs to be standard. I feel like it has to be standard.
Yeah, it almost seems like like you're playing a game of roulette, right? So it depends what kind of officer do you meet at the window, right? I remember when I first went, we had 3 counters. This was back in the day when the embassy was at cooperative building, the old embassy by the roundabout, and there was one lady, one old white lady there who was really mean, and you all lining up, and because you can always hear the results for the last person that went, and she kept chasing people away. And when I was next to supposed to go to her window, and I decided not to. I went to the bathroom first to go to another window where I thought there'd be someone more favorable, because everybody going to her window got chased away. So the person in front of me, when it was my time to go, just before I was supposed to go, I went to the bathroom and I came back later. And the person who went before me went to her window and got chased away. And I happened to go to the next lady, and I got in. So I really wonder what, fate really works in weird ways. What might have happened had I gone to the original window that I was supposed to go to? It's so subjective. These interviews with the embassy, it's quite unfortunate. We've actually been having problems, and I think Sylvester will speak to this also. We invited people for our KESA conference, the Kenya Student Scholars Association, and we have major issues with visas now because a lot of our Kenyan students can't come.
You actually mentioned something very funny, because I remember my situation too was kind of like similar. Like a decade ago, I went to Gigiri. It was a Gigiri, But then in the table, in the desk where I was supposed to go, a couple of people were denied already. And then when I brought my papers, they didn't even look at my papers. They were like, okay, where are you going? What are you doing? Here, you got it. Wait for it on the email. And I was like, okay, that was fast. So you're right. It's pretty interesting. So I was like, wait, was I the lucky number 7 or lucky number? So you're right about that. It's also very nerve-wracking at the moment too.
Yeah.
I think by the time you show up at the consulate's desk, they already have made a predetermination that they're going to give you. You just have to prove why they need to give you. Because oftentimes, I also remember when I went, I saw a whole lot of people being denied, even they didn't even get an opportunity to say their name. And then I saw other people coming up, and then they were, the consulars were very easy on them, and they just had a conversation, and they're like, okay, you come for it. We'll mail it to you. Make sure your address is okay, and that's it. So I think by the time you go there, they've already made a predetermination of whether to give you or not. And then also now in the era of technology, they do a whole lot of background check. Who are you? What do you do? Do you have any importance? Let's say if you're a student, if you're looking for work, are you who you really say you are? Are you going to add value, and etc. So I think one thing I usually tell people is you need to master your game. You need to master your art. If you say you are a designer, don't just be a designer who spends time doing other things. Make sure you master your game. Make sure that you are actively involved in the community, the things that you are doing. You are building your portfolio, because I've also come to learn, even in the corporate world, nobody wants to be associated with someone who isn't doing something. So oftentimes, and I've also seen this with other embassies, the more value you have, the higher the chances of you being awarded. The less active you are, even though you say you're so good at something, the less likely people, they're going to pay attention to you. So I think that's something also I would like to tell, anyone who's thinking of moving abroad. Don't wait for the time you're going for the interview, then you start, doing things. Start right now, build your portfolio, build your network, and make it happen. So when the time comes, you have a massive portfolio of supporting documentation. Now, this is who you are, this is what you do, and this is what you're going to benefit the people, and etc.
I'd like to go back to what Professor Monda mentioned on KESA, Kenya Scholars and Studies Association. So this is a conference that happens annually, and they invite different people to, come and present your research. And it doesn't have to be even scholars, even people in like different industries. It's not only like scholars. So when they do the call for papers and you submit, now kind of my colleague has just talked about, Imani, you have to prove that whatever you're being called to present is something that you do. So if, for instance, you're coming to KESA to present about a certain topic, so if somebody Googles your name, do they see you in those forums? Do you go to, are you involved in that particular field? So that's why you're going to go to the visa and being asked questions, and they already know, like they see what you do. So you just say, hey, I'm going for this conference. This is something that I do, and I'm coming back. So also adding on the point of not overstaying, this is something that I did. Like with Kenyan Boys Choir, we traveled to the US about 8 times, to the UK a couple of times, China, France, and we made sure we went back by the time it expired. So by the time you go back for another visa, they see your history, like you never overstayed, you've not broken the law as Grace advised. So it will be easy. So going back to the question about how to get the B1, B2 or tourist again, so conferences, and you can also get it through if you have, for example, a relative who's graduating, maybe they can invite you to go for their graduation. But now again, you must prove that you go back. So that's the main thing. But conferences and there are various visas for, and then B1, B2 again. For me, being a singer, that's another way. So if you have talent, that's another way of getting a visa to go to places where you have like festivals that you are.
Yeah.
So that's another way.
Great. I'm not sure I'm audible right now, but if I am, I'd like to know from your perspective, Professor Monda and Sylvester, why do you think, some of these students are denied visas, even in as much as it's genuine they're going for their studies? And your organization is not just the only one, where students are being denied visas. I've heard of many other organizations whose students are not being allowed to travel for studies. So with your 2 cents, or whatever you want to call them, give me what you think are the reason why. Because I don't think the embassy can be lame enough to just come up, with a way to deny as visa if they are sure, or the students have proof that they're going for their studies. Your own perspective. So Professor Monda, begin with that.
Sure. Yeah, personally, I think I'd answer that question in 2 ways. There's a structural international relations problem between US and developing countries, and US and Kenya in this particular context. In other words, it's an asymmetrical relationship. So the American government generally tends to feel that immigrants coming from developing countries like Kenya are coming to get a benefit here. It's almost like you're going to heaven. So they just structurally, over the years, they've just had very negative immigration law. So even if you look at the US immigration till the 1960s, until the Immigration Reform Act was passed, right, a lot of the preference was for immigration from Europe. It's only after the 1964 Immigration Reform Act that they started to open up. So a lot of those systemic problems are still there, and maybe we could go into details of that on another show. But I think more aside from the international relations perspective, I think is a personal perspective. So into this, I put 3 very basic things. In US, you really need to maintain eye contact. So if you go to the embassy, you need to look at that officer in their eye. You need to answer questions very clearly and directly, and you have to maintain eye contact. I think socially in Africa and Kenya, we have that problem that when you're speaking to an authority, you look down. If you're speaking to someone older than you, you're not supposed to look them directly in the eye. The US culture, you need to be strong, brave, and put yourself out there. You have to look at these people directly in the eye and answer questions clearly and firmly. Maintain eye contact. Second question is, don't lie. When I went for my student visa to come here for my master's, I'd been denied because I tried to apply to come for my undergraduate the first time. And they have the records. So when I went the second time for my master's, they said, have you ever applied for a US visa on the application? I said, yes, because they have the records. They could see 3 years before I had applied. There's no reason to lie. If you lie to a federal official, that's already a felony.
That's an offense.
That's a major offense. And then the third aspect is social media, right? Now with social media, they can look up on Facebook and see what are you posting. Well, unasema unaenda majuu, utakuwa veve, utakuwa vizuri. You're going to do all these things. You're going to go and see so and so and so and so. And you're really going to visit, but you're really going to stay, and you're posting all these things to your friends on Facebook. And these people, they're following you. They can see what you're posting on Facebook. What are you telling your friends you're going to do when you go to the States? So I think sometimes people are very, innocuous about this. But I think particularly in the post 9/11 era, the US is following everyone everywhere. During the Bush era, remember there was this scandal where they were even spying on Americans. in the US. They were tracking phone calls of people coming in and out of the US. Imagine if they could do that for US citizens, what do they do for foreigners? So I think we need to be very careful. What are you posting on social media, firstly? Secondly, maintain eye contact. And thirdly, if you've been to the embassy before and you've been denied, tell the truth. Say why you were there, why you were denied. Just be honest. Because when you lie, that's a guaranteed you won't get your visa. You've committed a felony. You've lied to a federal official.
Away from the visa issuance and all of those kind of stuff, I'd like to know, how are you guys managing investment? And I'm so sure most of you guys are looking back to come back to the country and come back to your various homes. How is it working for you if you have that plan? Do you have any one of you that would like to begin this conversation?
I can go first. I can't see anyone, so
ladies first. Let's do this.
Okay. So that's a pretty good point and question that you brought up, Pasil. And to me, I would say one of the ways that I decided to start investing back home is just through my company, Jibu Labs, right? In Jibu Labs, we created Jenga Realty, which is a platform that's going to enable Africans living in the United States to be able to buy property back home pretty easily. Because this is an issue I experienced. I mean, having now stayed here for now almost a decade plus, I found it that it was so hard to just find like banks back home that are offering mortgages, or even just finding a way to buy a property was pretty hard. So I think my biggest investment is just building a startup that will help with this particular issue and hoping to solve it for other Kenyans too here, and also other Africans, not just only Kenyans, because I'm seeking to target like Nigerians and Ghanaians. It's a pretty big project. The other thing that I'll also do for myself too is just also invest in stocks, which I think is something that we all know. That's a good investment, just investing in stocks. It can be risky from time to time, but I don't trade, like, let's say, the puts and options. No, I just buy stocks and put them over time. And also when you work in tech, one thing that I know many of us don't know or might know today is that you're given company stocks, and those stocks kind of like just vest based on the company over years. Apart from that, just make sure that you buy other properties here and also back home to make sure you're investing. That's what I normally do, I would say. But I'm also young, so I would like to hear from the others.
I'd like to hear from Professor Monda, if at all he has that, plan in the future.
Yeah. So for me, I kind of see this question on investment in two ways, right? So when you come to the US, you need to realize this is your new home, and as they say, a rolling stone gathers no moss. So my own personal view has been, settle yourself in the US, get your own investments in the US. When you're settled in the US, then you can also always navigate, how to invest in Kenya. And I think this is where we go back to, how do you build social capital, right? So it's not if you're able, at least go back to Kenya, go back home at least once, twice a year, just to see how things are changing. If you're thinking about property, my own view is go and actually see the property, because investing, for example, in the coast where they have problems with title deeds because of just the history of lands at the coast is very different than investing in Nairobi or, say in Isiolo, right? You really need to go and see the property, see what it is. Is it a reputable company? Make sure that issues of title are sorted out. But I really have to emphasize this. I really think you can't come to the US, emigrate here, and still have one foot in Kenya. You have to be very focused about build where you are, contribute to this country, grow in America. So grow in what you're trying to do in Kenya.
Great. I'd like to hear from Idris's perspective. Idris, if you're very keen, intentionally picking up on the men, besides the lady that began this conversation. So let me hear from you, Idris.
I think personally, in terms of investment, from the word go, for me, I know coming here, I really wanted to. I didn't see myself living, like being here a long time. I didn't see myself here because also career-wise, always, saw myself, establishing myself back at home and stuff. Now, right now, as much as my family is here, uh, and that is my partner, right? The rest of my family is in Kenya, so I tried to do as much as I could back at home, and for me, it also like involves uh, giving back, like setting up schools. One of my biggest plans is like setting up a school. So I wanted to do that at home. And where do I start? From the region that that raised me, the place that raised me, and I grew up in. But personally, I mean, as a Somali, most of us, like, our investment is in kettles and nomadic life, so livestock and all that. So that's personally, that's one area that I don't feel like very comfortable getting so much into it.
Yeah, are you acquiring a ranch in the US?
No, that's one thing that like, I think working in the US, like I said, I've always dreamed of, like, long time coming back home. But so personally, it's for me, is like my investment led towards either purchasing land for real estate, and just and cattle. And but like Professor Monda said, is like, for instance, like in real estate, you have to be there physically, and I believe in that. Like, for in places like even Nairobi, before for instance, I've had a case where I've asked someone to, like, purchase a piece of land for me, but then when I eventually went back home, like, what I was told, it was totally different from when I got there and I saw. It was like two different stories. So this is an advice, definitely, is that if you really want to get into that, then it's really good for you yourself to be on the ground, to see what you're really putting your money into, what going to invest in. But another thing that I just forgot, one of the ladies said, is that investing in stocks. So in the US, and it's very easy, and like, I think in Kenya, if you want to get into stocks, I realized that I think by the second semester of living in the US, sorry, Madonna mentioned that about stocks. Here, by my second semester, I already, like, started buying stocks, for instance, of, like, all these different top companies. Whereas it's easy in the US compared to Kenya, where you have to go through, like, a brokerage firm, and the channels are really, really long. So while in the US, I'd encourage, especially, I think, for any young person here, get into the stocks, learn about it fast, and yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question. I know at point.
Yeah, whether you've answered my question or not, I think there's somebody who has benefited from your remarks, either learned something or got informed about something. And I'd like to finish by asking, there is a perception that the US, everything, like, is quite easy, and even the perception that money just, falls off from trees. Is that the case? And also tell us, how are you dealing with black tax? Because coming from families that are not so well off, there's so much expectation from you. So to begin this conversation, I'd like the software engineer to pick it up, and I hope you can be as brief as possible so that each one of us can wrap it up, and then we can call it a night or a day wherever we are. Thank you. Software engineer, it's your time. No, unmute, please. Unmute, please, Imani. I think you're muted.
I can say that the pressure to succeed back home and also to succeed here in the States is quite high. You have pressure to look after a family back home. You have also pressure to succeed here. But I think what I can say, what I've learned over the years, is if it's really worth it, you'll find a way to make it happen. And It all boils down to your personal principles. Are you focused? Are you determined? And oftentimes, I have come to realize what my grandfather used to say is, find yourself a passion, find yourself a talent, find yourself a hobby that can earn you something. And oftentimes, I've seen we fail when we try to turn things that are very foreign to us into money-making ventures. So, for example, you're not an artist, you try to be an artist. That whole process of trying to get in line to that can be quite tasking. So oftentimes I would advise is find yourself a hobby that you can quickly turn into a business, because then even when the going gets tough, you don't really get to see how tough it is because it is your hobby. It's something that you like. But when something is very foreign to you, you would actually feel the crunch. Yeah.
Madonna, please, how do you deal with black tax back at home? And I understand you don't come from a really well-off background. There's still expectations. Make it brief, please.
Yeah, I think just like what Imani said, it's just more about you as the person knowing what you want to get in life and just pursuing it without giving up. And my story is definitely different, as is for all of the panelists today. That's what I would say. Not so many words other than if you have a dream, pursue it. And also make sure it's something that you love, because I've realized if it's something that you don't love, we humans get bored pretty quickly. So you'll get bored. So find something that you love, something that you're passionate about, and pursue that to the end. And definitely it will pay off. And that's what I'm doing. So I believe I'm living my truth, and I'm happy about that.
Thank you so much. Grace, there is a person online that asks, Titus Kira asks, I have a question for Grace. Since you switched countries in the past, would you advise someone to apply for a visa to another country while in a third country like US? Or is it wise to go back to the home country and apply for a visa from your home country? Please answer, Titus, and then I think we can wrap it up for today.
All right. I think it depends on where you are and where you want to go. I know, like, there's some different visas, like the student visa. If you want to apply for a UK student visa, you need to apply from your home country. So it really varies. If you are in America, you want to go to Europe for like visiting visa, again, depends on what visa you want. You can do that here. But if you want to do student from America to go to Europe, there's a bit of complexity in that. So do your research.
Thank you so much, guys, for creating time. I'm so sorry. It's unfortunate that we cannot, further extend our time because time is up. And as you're aware, we already started late. But with those few remarks, I'm hoping that somebody somewhere got informed and got educated on how perhaps to start or what it is that is exactly happening on the ground. And I hope we can keep having this conversation over and over again for the purposes of, helping our fellow Kenyans wherever they want to be so that each one of us can be able to achieve their dreams. So I'd like to thank my panelists for tonight. Professor Monda, thank you so much. Sylvester Makobi, thank you so much for creating time. Thank you so much, Idris Mukhtar. Thank you so much, Grace Odengo. Thank you so much to Madona. I don't know why you don't have a white wig or white hair. Thank you so much, Madona Wambua. And I really look forward to us having this conversation as often as possible. And I know how life can be so busy, but if we can help a community, then why not? Thank you so much, guys, and have a good time. See you again soon. Bye-bye for now.